We have guests today who are well positioned to talk to us about what this technological revolution means to us. Our experts today are Navin Arora, who is President of Business Solutions at TELUS, and Pau Castells, who's the Head of Economic Analysis at GSMA, a company that provides insights and intelligence about the mobile communications sector around the world. We'll examine how 5G will revolutionize and transform business operations and influence customer revenues, improve productivity and operational expenses for businesses, as well as adding to safety and security. And we'll discuss how investment in this next generation technology will drive $150 billion to the Canadian economy over the next 20 years. So it's going to be a fascinating discussion. Navin, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Perrin, for that excellent introduction, and really appreciate this opportunity to join you all today and talk about something we're very excited about here at TELUS, and that is how 5G will open up incredible opportunities for the Canadian economy, our society, and for businesses. So 2020 has been a year unlike any other. I don't need to tell you that. The pandemic has forever changed how we live and work, and it's clearly highlighted how essential digital communications infrastructure is for our society, which is why 5G comes at such an important time in our lives, as Perrin just said. If we look back to previous generations of wireless technology, it was really consumers who drove the greatest usage of those networks. So with the 2G network, we got text messaging. With the 3G networks, we finally had voice and data together. And in fact, the first iPhone could not have been launched without it. And when 4G and LTE came along, it blew us away with its ability to deliver both speed and power. So while the first 4 generations enabled incredible connectivity and productivity for everyone, the real value of 5G is how it can transform business specifically, and by default, our competitiveness in a global digital economy. So 5G is going to be 10 times faster, but what makes it really exciting is that it will be 5 times more responsive. It will bring ultra low latency and reliability, and it will connect millions of sensors and devices per square kilometer versus a fraction of that today with 4G. But before the promise of 5G becomes a reality, the adequate fiber infrastructure must be in place. So let me explain that a bit. So one of the biggest advantages of 5G is that the airwaves or the spectrum can carry massive amounts of data, but that signal can't travel very far between cell towers. So because of this, we need a robust deployment of high-density mini cell towers, or what we call small cells, all connected to a terrestrial or land-based fiber network to get that massive amount of wireless data to the internet. And to ensure we're ready, TELUS and our partners have been laying the foundation for 5G by building TELUS Pure Fiber, our most advanced broadband network with virtually unlimited capacity and unparalleled reliability. So with that, as a bit of background, I want to talk next about the great things 5G will do for Canada's competitiveness, our society, and what it means for businesses and the businesses your organizations represent. So 20 years ago, if someone asked about Canada's most critical infrastructure, many would have said roads, railways, or pipelines. Now, if you ask what infrastructure is critical for the next 20 years and beyond, many, including me, would say it's the digital infrastructure. And in today's digital economy, we need to treat digital infrastructure with the same weight and urgency as traditional infrastructure because of the huge economic potential that it brings. In fact, it's estimated 5G will create 250,000 new jobs and contribute tens of billions of dollars annually to Canada's GDP growth, which you'll hear more about from Pau shortly. So here in Canada, we've invested billions of dollars to create the conditions for driving that economic growth. In the last 20 years alone, TELUS has invested nearly $200 billion in infrastructure, spectrum, and operations to enhance the coverage, speed, and the reliability of our networks. And over the next 3 years, we're investing another $40 billion because we believe the strength of Canada's economic future and competitiveness on the global stage will be driven by the innovations business will create for society. So advanced communication networks like 5G are a significant piece of that. And I promise this will be the only part of the presentation where I'll do a little bit of bragging about TELUS. And the reason I do it is because I truly believe it raises the bar for all Canadian operators, which ultimately strengthens Canada's overall competitiveness. So here goes. Very recently, UK-based OpenSignal announced that TELUS is the fastest network in the world. And in fact, even though most of our network is still on 4G, it's faster than South Korea's 5G network, which comes in as the second fastest. And we've accomplished this despite the challenges with deploying technology and infrastructure across our vast and rugged landscape. So from a technology standpoint, we've really come a long way, and Canada is now considered a global wireless powerhouse. And this is important because it enables us to fuel more diversity and innovation within our economy while contributing to something else that's equally important, reducing Canada's environmental footprint. 5G will need to support a 1,000-fold traffic increase in the next 10 years. This is really explosive growth, but 5G will substantially be more energy efficient. In fact, the amount of energy used to transmit data will be 8 to 15% of what is currently used. And it's predicted that with 5G technology, we can drive significant emissions reductions that will equate to taking more than 10 million vehicles off the roads. So pretty impactful changes for our society, but it's important to note that 5G is a journey, it's not a destination. So as it evolves, it's going to enable small businesses, schools, retailers, manufacturers, farmers, health providers, and many others to discover better ways to use technology that will make a real difference in the lives of Canadians. And for our part at TELUS, the investments we're making are driven by our social purpose to use our technology so we can drive better outcomes for society. So let me share a few examples where we're exploring. So I'll start with one of the most anticipated technologies, which is, of course, self-driving cars. So connected cars will hit the road for real as early as 2023. Cars today can see and think for themselves and can sense what's going on around them. Tesla is a great example, but they lack the ability to communicate with each other. With 5G connected sensors and video analytics, cars will be able to communicate with everything on the road, reading traffic conditions or automatically yielding to let an ambulance go by, helping save lives and keep our roads safe. It's estimated that 5G enabled solutions could drive a 10% drop in congestion and boost GDP by as much as $270 million in Vancouver alone and $535 million in Montreal. So now, I don't have the stats to back this up, but I think it's safe to say you could drive up to probably $1 billion of savings by fixing congestion on the 401 alone. And even though I live in Calgary, I did live in Toronto in a previous life, so I know the 401 very well. So the next example is an industry that matters to all of us, which is healthcare. So 5G truly connects the entire ecosystem of health providers together, opening up new ways to deliver care to patients. The UK is already exploring this and recently piloted a 5G-powered robotic glove to conduct remote-controlled ultrasonic scans in an ambulance, which are then shared with the hospital in real time so that they can be prepared for that patient and hopefully save more lives. The last one I'll touch on is an industry that will become more important in the next few decades, and that's agriculture. In the next 30 years, the global population is expected to reach almost 10 billion people, which means food production will need to increase by 70%, and we all know there's no more available arable land on the planet Earth. So we need to find sustainable ways to meet that demand and minimize global food waste. And while many farmers have begun to adopt new technology to achieve this, 5G is going to make things very interesting. Farmers will be able to remotely monitor their crops and make real-time decisions about what they need and when to water or when to fertilize. And food retailers will be able to track the temperature of their products throughout the supply chain, helping reduce food spoilage by up to 50%. So 5G enables this, linking the entire ecosystem of stakeholders and systems together in real time, creating new ways to optimize growing conditions and drive better yield of food supply. This is by far one of society's most pressing challenges. And we at TELUS believe we have a responsibility to help answer that challenge, which is why earlier this morning we announced the launch of TELUS Agriculture, a new business dedicated to really providing the technology that will digitally connect and transform the end-to-end global food system. So yes, there's a world of possibilities with 5G. So now let's take a few minutes to talk about how 5G is super important for businesses. The pandemic has accelerated the world going digital. I don't need to tell any of you that. And in fact, when you look at some of the reports, they say that in the first 90 days of COVID-19 alone, we saw a 10-year acceleration in e-commerce. Regardless of how big or small your business is or your industry, we've all been forced to adapt and rethink how we're going to do business. So digitally transforming has gone from a good to have to a strategic imperative. And as business leaders looking to thrive in a digital economy, there are 4 key reasons why we need to pay attention to 5G. The first one is obvious, which is new revenues. So we've seen how companies like Amazon, Netflix, and countless others have disrupted industries, and in particular, the customer experience. With 5G, companies can get ahead by using data insights to predict demand and better understand their customer behaviors, which can be used to create new lines of services and offer more personalized experiences to customers, all of which will drive incremental revenue. So IKEA is a great example. They're experimenting with AI or artificial intelligence, and their IKEA Place app, which allows customers to see how furniture looks in their homes before they buy. So a great way they're setting themselves apart, and 5G is going to further enable that over time. The second is driving greater productivity. So working virtually is now a necessity. And I think one of the things that's permanently altered is not only where we're going to work, but how we're going to work. So imagine having lifelike experiences for virtual meetings, training, and customer interactions, or inspecting a building or manufacturing plant without having to leave your home. Connected solutions like smart whiteboards, telepresence, augmented reality, all open the door to some pretty cool opportunities for staying connected and working virtually in new ways. The third area where 5G is going to transform businesses really is around businesses' cost structure. So 5G is going to make artificial intelligence applications more mainstream, enabling companies to do things like monitor equipment and detect safety issues before they become a real problem, or track product inventory autonomously so they're alerted to when a product is running low. So ultimately, the accuracy and availability of this kind of data and insight will enable companies to make faster and better decisions, contain costs, prevent delays, and keep people safe. And finally, there's that very important aspect of security. It's predicted that there will be 75 billion connected devices in the next 5 years. That's a lot of data, which opens the door for security vulnerabilities, but 5G has the potential to improve on previous generations and set companies up to better monitor and identify those threats. So this is why 5G is coming at such an opportune time. And while it's still very much in its infancy, it's already starting to move from hype to reality. So here's a couple of examples of how it's becoming real today. So first, in finance, we're working with financial institutions to help enable mobile pop-up branches, giving them the ability to drive down their real estate costs while extending their reach to new customers in new locations, which will give customers a complete branch experience with great access and convenience. And the second example is in municipalities across Canada. We're developing solutions that will enable police officers to send mission-critical information, such as body cam photos or videos and documents in real time, creating a massive opportunity for emergency personnel to make faster decisions and ultimately be safer. So I think you get the picture. We're living and working in a digital world, and 5G will underpin the way that world works. I'll close by saying that while 5G is a journey, every business needs to start preparing now, as none of us can really do it alone. So it requires massive collaboration between governments, business councils, network operators, hardware and software companies, digital application providers, and community organizations, all working together to accelerate 5G and the opportunities that it will undoubtedly afford. At the end of the day, making the right digital investments within your businesses or the businesses that you support will enable everyone to flourish in this digital economy. And I truly believe the time has never been more important than now to do this. So for all the challenges created by this pandemic, I think one of the most important lessons we learned is how quickly and successfully we can make things happen for the betterment of society when we all work together. And so over the last 8 months, the way in which we've navigated this crisis together, although not perfect, was nothing short of astounding. Looking ahead, it's essential that we apply that same level of intensity, effort, efficiency, and collaborative spirit in enabling 5G to create economic prosperity and really positive social outcomes for Canadians. And with that, I'm pleased now to turn it over to Pau Castells, who's the Director of Economic Analysis from GSMA, who's going to share some additional insights on economic benefits we can expect from 5G. So Pau, who's in Barcelona, over to you.
Thank you, Navin, and hello, everyone. If we can put my slides up. Well, while we do that, let me start with, first things first, with some introduction as to who we are. So we are GSMA, the Global Association of Mobile Operators. We bring together around 750 mobile operators worldwide, and also around 400 companies in the industry. GSMA Intelligence, which I am part of, is the research and analysis branch of the GSMA. We are a leading provider of research, analysis, and forecasts on the mobile industry. And as part of that, we have an extensive economic research agenda. Today, I'll talk about a new study, and Navin has referred to it. It's just out this morning, where we look at the opportunity that 5G brings to Canada. In the report, in particular, we evaluate Canada's readiness for 5G, and we assess the expected macroeconomic impacts from the introduction of the technology. Next slide, please. Actually, we can move to the next one. Great. 5G is now a commercial reality worldwide. Despite COVID-19, adoption of 5G will reach more than 200 million people by the end of December this year. And we will see at that point that 5G services will have been launched in nearly 60 countries by more than 140 operators. This is forecast to grow to nearly $2 billion globally by the end of 2025. And most of this growth in adoption will really happen in three regions primarily, in North America, in Europe, and in Asia, where China is playing a central role in that regard. Moving on to the next slide, we can see Canada is now also entering the 5G era. So even if the pandemic will slow adoption rates in the very short term, by 2025, 5G adoption should be reaching around 45% of population based on current forecasts. That's the green line in the chart. This is a significant rate of adoption, but it will still trail the projected adoption rates that we will see in other countries. In particular, just to give a couple of examples, South Korea at that point will be around 80%, we expect, and the US will be around 60%. 5G coverage, so that's the red line, is projected to reach more than 80% of the Canadian population in just 5 years. So it's a high percentage, and this will obviously involve a lot of investment by operators over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. So, as one of the most developed economies in the world, Canada has much to gain from the rollout of 5G. So 5G has the potential to deliver new and innovative services for consumers, from virtual reality to artificial intelligence or autonomous cars. And as we will see in this slide, 5G also has the potential to help address Canada's slow productivity growth, which is a major threat to the competitiveness of Canada's economy in the long term and of Canada's businesses. In the past 2 decades, we can see in this figure, productivity has really performed poorly in Canada. It has been outperformed productivity growth consistently when compared to international benchmarks. So the red line in this chart is Canada. We can see it has been growing more slowly than any benchmark that we compare it to, which includes from the OECD average to the US to the G7 countries to the European Union. As a result, Canada's average labor productivity today is lower than for the OECD average and for most other comparators. Now, this is quite important. It's important because it really means that with the same amount of effort, same amount of labor, Canada is able to produce less output than other countries. And with this situation, that's where 5G and investments in technology can play an important role in reverting that trend and in boosting economic growth. Let's move on to the next slide. So to understand that, to understand this potential, so how can 5G play a role in productivity and economic growth in Canada? What we do in this study is that we analyze the macroeconomic effects of 5G in Canada. And we do it based on the results of a very detailed macroeconomic model. Don't worry, I won't go into the detail here. It's discussed very extensively in the report. But in terms of the intuition, the model, what it does, it assesses how the adoption of new mobile technologies, in this case 5G, will impact the growth of the economy overall and for each sector of the Canadian economy. And what we find is that 5G networks will deliver approximately 150 billion in value add in GDP to the Canadian economy over the entire period 2020 to 2040. As just an indication of the scale of this impact, what does this look like? The additional yearly economic impact generated by 5G in Canada will be similar in size to the value add of whole industries. So for example, the size of the aerospace industry overall can be equivalent to the impact that 5G will make every year in Canada. Moving on to the next slide. There is clearly a huge opportunity, but not all Canadian industries and sectors will benefit equally from the rollout. This depends, the extent to which a sector will benefit depends on a range of factors, but I would particularly like to highlight two. So the first one is the readiness of each sector, how ready it is to adopt new technologies. That varies a lot from business to business, but in particular from from industry to industry. The second factor is the extent to which use cases that are enabled by 5G are applicable to the sector. Just to give you an example, the healthcare sector, that's an area that we expect to benefit a lot by the 5G rollout. Why? Well, because 5G is really playing to the strengths of the healthcare sector in a number of respects. So for example, 5G will mean that there'll be a more widespread use of telemedicine, since the network can support real-time, high-quality video. Or 5G will enable a more extended network of medical connected devices, which will support better monitoring of chronic conditions. So clearly there's quite a lot of variation between sectors, and that's what the analysis shows. As we show here in the chart, in Canada, the economic impacts of 5G will deliver the overall greatest boost in manufacturing, in oil and gas, in healthcare, and also in retail. Next slide, please. Now, despite all this potential, we currently do not expect the economic impacts of 5G in Canada to materialize at the same level that we will see in other OECD countries. As the chart shows, we forecast the potential boost of 5G to track behind international benchmarks. And one key factor that explains that are the regulatory conditions that 5G in Canada is facing. And in particular, I'd like to highlight one key element there, which is spectrum policy. Now, for those of you that are not necessarily familiar with spectrum, that are not from the telecom sector, radio spectrum is really the DNA of mobile communications. So if there are no radio spectrum bands available, one cannot distribute the signal from antennas to the devices. So no spectrum, no mobile communications really. And 5G requires new spectrum bands to be licensed by the government to mobile operators. Next slide. In the case of 5G, so far what we have seen is that at the global level, there is one particular band, which is the 3.5 gigahertz band, that has clearly emerged as the key band for the initial launches of 5G. In Canada, however, this key band, which is called the 3.5 gigahertz band, is not scheduled to be auctioned until June next year, at which point we will have had already 37 other countries in the world that will have assigned the band. And this is important because delays in spectrum assignment make it more difficult to invest and roll out quickly. So the less spectrum that is available, the more number of towers that need to be built, the higher the costs are, and eventually the slower the rollout is. Now, in the next slide, what we can also see is that the timings of the assignment of spectrum are really not the only problem right now in Canada when it comes to 5G spectrum policy. So in addition to spectrum being available later than in other countries, when this eventually comes in June next year, well, actually it will be auctioned in June next year, at that point, Canadian operators will have access to a limited amount of spectrum in this band. So there'll be only 200 megahertz. There are set-aside rules in this auction, which means that for the three national operators, the nationwide operators, Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, there'll be a maximum of 150 megahertz, which means that at most national operators will have around 50 megahertz. And this is significantly below what the United Nations Agency for Telecoms is currently recommending to do. So the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, is recommending at least 100 megahertz per operator. Now, we have some more recent positive news in that respect. So there's an ongoing consultation that the government launched in August about the possibility of offering more spectrum for 5G in this band. The outcomes of the consultation are unclear at this point, but if this materialized, this could help unlock some of this potential and improve the situation. Next slide, please. So it is clear that the current set of spectrum policies in Canada are not ideal for 5G. And this impacts mobile operators, but also consumers. What we did in this study, we wanted to understand the macroeconomic impact of this. So in the study, we analyzed how alternative 5G spectrum policies could impact macroeconomic growth for the country. And what we did is we developed a scenario where Canada's spectrum policy is brought in line with international best practice. And that doesn't mean that we're not assuming here that Canada gets more spectrum than any other country, or that gets that spectrum earlier. We're basically just bringing the policies in Canada in line with what we have seen elsewhere. The results show that by doing that, 5G spectrum policies in line with other countries, that would deliver well in excess of 30 billion of additional GDP growth for the Canadian economy over the period. So this would bring the impact of 5G in Canada a lot closer to its full potential and more in line with the average effects that we expect to see in the US and in most other OECD countries. Next slide, please. Right, and I want to leave you with just a few thoughts summarizing the study. So 5G clearly has the potential to increase productivity in Canada and bring new innovative services to consumers and businesses. Our analysis, our modeling shows that 5G can contribute an additional 150 billion in GDP growth to the Canadian economy over the period that we analyzed. And in particular, it's important to have a positive or policy environment that actually is encouraging or is promoting the right level of investment. So the analysis also shows that bringing 5G spectrum policies in Canada in line with international best practice will generate an additional 30 billion in GDP growth that would materialize over this period. And yeah, I think that's very much it. In the next slide, we have the link for the report. I encourage all of you interested to take a look. There's a lot of detail. Everything that I've said there is there and a lot more. It has been just published today and is now available for download on the GSMA Intelligence website. And thank you all for your attention and looking forward to any questions and to the discussion.
Pau and Navin, thank you very much. That's absolutely fascinating. What you've outlined is both an incredible potential of this technology to revolutionize how we do business and how society operates, but also some of the constraints that we have that are holding us back in Canada relative to what other countries are doing, and the need for us to close that gap. If I can be permitted a personal note, as I think you're probably aware, almost 3 decades ago, I was Minister of Communications in Canada. And at that time, the department was very proud about its policies on spectrum allocation, spectrum management. And all of our cultural and technological policies were premised on the belief that spectrum was a constrained resource. There was only so much of it to go around. As a result, it had to be very highly regulated by government. I remember asking my officials at that time, because we were starting to see the development of fiber. And I said, what would it mean if we have it entirely wrong, and if in fact spectrum is an infinitely expanding resource? None of us in those days could have conceived of something like Netflix or the other services that you were talking about. And so the potential here is simply revolutionary. But what you've been saying is that we are not achieving that potential today because we are not allocating enough of the spectrum to begin with, and secondly, that we're simply slow at the rate in which we're doing that. Can I start with a couple of questions? We have a number of them on Slido, and I want to get to those as rapidly as possible, but a couple from me. The first, Navin, you mentioned today that TELUS today launched its agriculture drive, digitalization of agriculture. Yet it was interesting in Pau's chart that he showed when he was looking at where are the benefits going to come, that it was sectors like manufacturing, oil and gas, retail, healthcare, where we would see the greatest impact, the greatest benefit. And the lowest benefit was seen in agriculture with 1%. How do you reconcile the two?
Just to add, I mean, before Navin answers, I mean, just to add one thing, that one factor that explains to a large extent the fact that agriculture is low in the list is question of sheer size, right? So the size of agriculture in Canada today is not the same as the size of healthcare or manufacturing, right? So that already, to an extent, explains why agriculture is further down the line. So exactly, the starting point is smaller, right? So yeah, I think that's one element. I mean, the fact that is lower than ours, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are no applications for agriculture. Clearly, there are some that will make a big difference in the sector.
Yet what we're looking at, what Navin set out, was a revolution in agriculture. And I'm astonished in talking to people in the sector to hear how already the digitalization of agriculture is having a dramatic impact on their operations. And it suggests to me that we're simply scratching the surface of what we can in that sector and in so many others.
Yeah, maybe Perrin, I can take a stab at that. I mean, there different industries, different sectors are at different places in the digital life cycle of that particular industry or sector. And so, when you look at, for example, healthcare in Canada, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that doctors were still using paper files and keeping notes on paper. And today, now you have most doctors using electronic medical record systems that are connected. Soon you'll see e-prescribing. Doctors are able to pull up, blood work and other test results that, were faxed not too long ago. And so that's an example of an industry that's wasn't digital first, is now transforming. And I think the pandemic and the health aspects of the pandemic has exacerbated the need to go digital in healthcare and really accelerated things like virtual care, for example. So now when you look at agriculture and you look at the social ramifications of massive global population growth and the fact that this is an industry like maybe healthcare was several years ago, where technology and the digitization of that industry is more or less in its infancy, right? And and I give the example of one day you can go to the food or to the supermarket and have a scan code on an item like fresh meat of some sort. You can scan that, and you should be able to trace back exactly which farm or which country or which region that came from, and what was the controls and quality processes along the value chain of getting that meat from its original source into the supermarket. And so, from our perspective, in agriculture, that's an industry that's ripe for digital transformation. Yes, of course, there's a lot more technology happening, but it's in isolation in different parts of the agriculture value chain. And how do you drive optimization within those parts? Because you have to get more out of what you have in terms of productivity and reducing spoilage. And then how do you connect the end-to-end to truly digitize that business? So to Pau's point, it may not be as big as healthcare or other industries, but that, from our perspective, doesn't change the fact that it is a business or an industry that is ripe for digital transformation, and that 5G is actually really going to enable that, especially, as we push 5G into the rural and agriculture areas of Canada.
But as I listened to your presentations, it was a good news, bad news presentation. That is, if we adopt this and if we roll it out rapidly, and if we are prepared to do in each sector we need to do to fully take advantage of the potential, we can dramatically improve our productivity and close some of that gap that we've seen developing with other countries. But at the same time, you're indicating that other countries are moving ahead even more rapidly than we are already. So we could see that competitiveness gap growing if we don't have both the private sector and government working together in a very concerted way to encourage adoption and roll it out. What can be done to accelerate the rollout of 5G technologies, particularly into rural and remote areas? The big challenge is, of course, Canada's landmass.
I mean, happy to jump in first, and Navin,
sure,
feel free to interrupt me at any point. Just wanted to kind of like bring from our perspective. I mean, we look at policy, technology, strategy issues around the mobile industry from an international perspective. And the question of the digital divide is something that is present in the debate in very much any country. Question of how do we actually get the private sector and the public sector to work together so that the networks can reach us as far as possible. Right? And the economics of networks are complex and challenging in rural areas. That's undeniable. There are a range of solutions that have been emerging. Technological innovations in mobile networks actually mean that the frontier where you can actually roll out profitably is now further out than it was before. There are also solutions like network sharing, for example, that have also meant that where you cannot roll out individual networks separately, you might roll out one together, pull resources together, and then actually get that coverage further out. Obviously, there are then solutions around bringing or having policies from governments, especially around spectrum policy, that support that. But eventually, there are areas where it simply is not economical to roll out. And for those, clearly, collaboration between public and private sector is the only solution. There needs to be that collaboration that needs to occur. I mean, until the point where the technology, where the market actually can reach everyone, which we might get there. We're not quite there, but we might get there with in the future, not with 5G, with 6G, 7G, who knows? But in the meantime, we will still need to kind of get public and the private sector to work in those challenging situations where the economics are difficult.
Yeah, maybe I can top up just a bit, kind of give a bit of a specific Canadian perspective. So I completely agree that, Perrin, with your points on the digital divide and the importance of access to 5G for all Canadians. I think the investments we make within the private sector really go a long way to help expand connectivity. But as Pau said, we live in the second largest country in the world with some of the harshest climate and the most difficult landscape and terrain, not to mention, based on that landmass, a very small population. So, some parts are just simply economically unfeasible to do without the help of government. And, that's the role of government here to try to work with private enterprises to help bridge that divide. And so, getting that really strong working relationship and better collaboration between all levels of government, so municipal, provincial, and federal, and local communities, as well as Indigenous organizations, is really important, because that's another area where the digital divide is exacerbated. So as you started this call today, Perrin, the Universal Broadband Fund that the federal government announced today is super encouraging, right? It's exactly what Pau is saying, are things we need to do in Canada to catch up to perhaps some of the other countries that are ahead of us, and really strong coordination across federal, provincial, and private is really going to go a long way. But the one thing I will say, and it's not good enough by any means, but when you look at just rural Canada, it ranks number 12 in the world in terms of our connectivity speeds and capabilities, which is not bad. But the pandemic has really exacerbated the fact that we can't really rest on that. We need to move ahead, and we're going to do our part. At TELUS, we've invested $5 billion, since 2013 to connect 130 towns and cities with our pure fiber network, which helps close that divide. And then, we're also connecting 61 Indigenous communities in BC, Alberta, and Eastern Quebec with pure fiber, by the end of 2020. But, we need a much bigger level of investment and that collaboration between private and public to really get this from number 12 to number 1.
Thank you. Let's go to the questions that the audience has submitted. I think the first one you just answered about how telecoms will work with governments to establish a robust coast-to-coast infrastructure. So let's go to the next. From the Redwater and District Chamber of Commerce, there's a lot of concern that other countries will be looking at the information being sent and received from 5G towers. How secure is 5G networks from foreign intelligence?
How do you want me to go first on that, or do you want to take a stab at that? So,
I can take that. From a GSMA perspective, and again, that's the concerns around security are paramount for the industry. That's absolutely a key focus of any new technology. It was the case with 3G when we were at the 2G world, with 4G, and it's again the case with 5G. So the way in which 5G networks are built are to guarantee security in each country. Operators are in most countries, can't speak for every single country in the world, but in most countries, operators are working with governments to deliver networks that are secure and that can actually meet the conditions that are necessary from a public policy perspective. This will vary from country to country because the considerations will be different. But this is nothing new. So the way in which networks are secured and the way in which the threats change over time, and therefore the mitigation actions that are taken also change. That's a kind of like ongoing part of mobile networks. That's the way that they've always been. They keep on evolving as the security threats change, and that's happening with 5G as well.
Yeah, I would guess that given the applications we're looking at here, which are so sensitive, remote surgery, for example, or driverless cars, that the operators are going to have to put a priority on this, that they've way beyond what they've put into anything else in terms of security and integrity of the network.
Yeah, so I completely agree with that. Any organization these days, has to have security as their number one priority. It's just the reality of what we're dealing with in the world today. And at TELUS, we've always designed and managed and consistently upgraded our networks to meet, the most rigorous security best practices. We have, whether it's Huawei or any other vendor, because Huawei's been in the news a long time. The safety and security of our networks, is very clearly defined from our governments. And over the last 10 years, whether it's been a conservative government or a liberal government, there hasn't been any incidents of any nature. And we are always engaged on the forefront of anything that's happening globally around security forums, and being a world leader when it comes to cybersecurity, to really help to set the standard for the telecom supply chain. And we're going to continue to follow the guidance from the federal government and the regulators, and we await the outcome of the cybersecurity review that's underway. But in the meantime, given there's no Canadian, network equipment suppliers, we always procure equipment from several global companies, and we'll continue to work with all of the different international and domestic vendors to make sure we deliver, the best and most secure experience for our customers.
Thank you. Let's try to move quickly into some of the other questions. How can government or policy better support business in adapting to the digital economy? Quick thoughts on that?
So I think just on that point and thinking about 5G more specifically, I mean, when I think about business transformation, I think that the opportunity is huge, and I typically would think of three areas, right? So one is innovation. So how can 5G services help me as a business unlock innovation in my business? That's something that will be different for different sectors, but it's an important consideration to make. Secondly, are the new revenue opportunities. So because of the change that we will see from the consumer patterns, behaviors, and also in sectors, all this transformation, what does it mean for my business? So are there new revenue opportunities from all this change that I can anticipate? And finally, as many technology investments and with ICT is about efficiencies. So technology allows us to rethink processes, the product itself, and there are efficiencies there that actually are there to be made. And those businesses that actually are thinking about those things ahead, they have a lot to gain in the future.
Thank you. Pau, another question for you. What are the challenges to effective spectrum assignments in Canada, please?
Yeah, so I think we've covered that in the presentation a little bit. I mean, spectrum policy, as you mentioned, Perrin, I mean, it's not a new thing. It's been evolving, obviously, as the technologies have changed over time. There's now more spectrum than there was before, but also the requirements to offer 5G in terms of spectrum bandwidth are a lot higher than they were in the past. So it's absolutely a critical area. I mean, the questions about assigning spectrum timely in the right conditions and on the right bands. I mean, it sounds very simple. In practice, it's not. So I'm not necessarily kind of like taking a critical or overly critical view of the decisions being made by the Canadian government, because the situations sometimes are challenging, but clearly looking at Canada from an international perspective, there are a few things when it comes to 5G spectrum policy that stand out. Right? So you wouldn't expect a country like Canada to be the 40th or so in assigning spectrum in a critical band for 5G. You wouldn't expect the amount of spectrum in Canada to be a lot less than what the UN is recommending, right? So these are the things that are a bit striking from a benchmarking perspective, and that I know that to a degree the government is taking steps to actually improve and mitigate. But right now they stand out and they are a barrier.
Can I just follow up on that very quickly? Given the close integration technologically and economically between Canada and the United States, should we be simply rolling out the same speed and the same policies as in the United States when it comes to allocating spectrum?
I mean, it's difficult to say, right? Because each country has different complexities. The bands are assigned to different users, and the incentives and the way in which all these interests evolve are going to be different. So the starting position in the US is not the same as in Canada. It might be that for some, it's easier for them to release, and the opposite for Canada. But yeah, in this case, the US is actually seems like it's moving faster than Canada when it comes to 5G spectrum policy.
Time's running short, but I'd like to see if we can get through maybe three more questions that have been submitted. How ubiquitous is high band 5G in Canada, or is the plan to launch low and medium band first and then fill in the gaps?
So I'm not an expert on the different bands of 5G and how that will come together, but my understanding is we will be using 600 megahertz spectrum for rural connectivity when it comes to 5G, and we'll be using 3.5 megahertz eventually. We're using AWS today for greater speeds in the future. So I don't know, Pau, if you want to top up in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an international perspective, what we have seen typically is the 3.5 band. That's what's being used mostly as the main band to start 5G rollouts on, which obviously in Canada has been challenging because it's not there yet. But that's the main band that we have seen in most countries being deployed first. And then, yes, there are low bands for coverage. And in the future, we'll have even higher bands like the millimeter wave bands to provide even greater capacity. But it's the 3.5 band, the one that we're seeing most networks being launched at.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the auction in mid-2021 to be able to get our hands on the 3.5 band. So.
How do businesses build technology adoption into their strategic and operating plans when the connectivity infrastructure to support these changes may not be available to them? And how do they advocate for connectivity projects to improve this landscape? Who'd like to take a stab at that, Navin?
Yeah, I mean, I think advocating for connectivity projects, I think there's maybe two ways to do that. Number one, more at a macro level, we're in a democracy, send messages to your government representative, either provincial, municipal, or federal, on what you and your specific needs are, and for that of your community. I mean, at the end of the day, there's never enough funding to go around everywhere, but it needs to get prioritized, and the demonstration of that public need is very important. Secondly, I think coming to private organizations like TELUS, if we don't know the need is there, we can't help. And so, it's often we will build to a specific community or specific customers even, to satisfy that need. And if, groups of businesses or groups of members of the community in hard to reach places can help increase the scale of that, the probability of that is much better. In terms of how to prepare for something that's not here yet, I mean, I think there's, a lot. First of all, it is here. It's being rolled out, slowly but surely. Secondly, we know what the potential of 5G is. So it's similar to what Pau said, make sure you're keeping up, you're learning, you're reading, understand how, your competitors are going to react to 5G, start thinking about how you're going to evolve. Bring in some of the experts in your industry to help build out a digital roadmap that includes 5G as a backdrop, or high-speed broadband at the very least, either wired or wireless. And there's companies like TELUS and other telecommunications companies. That's what we're here to do. We're here to help drive digital transformation in your business. So reach out to us.
Thank you. Final question, and it's a tough one. How can personal service providers like registered massage therapists remain relevant in a post-COVID world? Consumer behavior has driven client frequency down, and sanitization has diminished intake volume. The industry cannot offer digital healthcare. How do you reconcile, how should business try to reconcile the demands of where you have to in person with digital infrastructure?
Yeah, well, maybe I can take a stab at that. I mean, I can't speak specifically for the massage therapy industry. It's not an area of my expertise, but I would say that in general, a lot of businesses have had to adapt to the new reality of digital transformation. We're like I said in my talk track, that the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation by 10 years. And so, I think talking to the experts, technological support that can help build a digital roadmap for your business, and it may mean modification of things, to your point around sanitization efforts and so forth. But I think get out there, talk to people, and see how you can adapt and thrive in this new world, right? I think there's a lot of trial and error. A lot of big businesses and successes have been driven by trial and error, and there's no difference here in my opinion.
Thank you, Navin. Well, Navin and Pau, sadly, we're out of time. This has been absolutely fascinating for me. And what you've done is to really open up for us the potential of these technologies in terms of the revolutionary impact that they can have on business and society. But we have to make the right decisions to enable them to happen, both at the governmental and at the level of business and the wider society. And you've set out some of those challenges for us. We're delighted to have people like you helping to lead the transformation in Canada. We're very grateful to you for joining us today, and we thank you for your participation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Farron.
Thank you all for joining us today. We'll look forward to getting together again soon.